So we talked about how Ritchie Blackmore walked out of Deep Purple and immediately built something new. We talked about that first Rainbow album, the one with his name right there in the title. Just in case anyone was confused about who was running the show, it was a strong debut, a real statement of intent. But Ritchie Blackmore was just warming up. Because in 1976, Blackmore went back to the studio with a mostly new lineup, a clear vision, and Ronnie James Dio in absolutely terrifying vocal form. And what came out the other side was Rainbow Rising, an album so good, so confident, so completely assured of itself that still sounds like it was beamed in from some parallel universe where hard rock achieved its absolute maximum potential and then stopped, because there was nowhere else to go. This is the story of how it got made and why it matters. Let's start with the band situation because, as we established last time, Ritchie Blackmore treating his lineup like a fantasy football roster was basically a full-time hobby at this point. By the time the first Rainbow album had run its course, Blackmore had already decided that significant changes were needed. Craig Gruber, the bassist who played on the debut, was out. Mickey Lee Soul, the keyboard player, was out. These weren't guys who'd done anything dramatically wrong. Blackmore just had a different picture in his head for what Rainbow needed to be, and they didn't fit that picture anymore. Simple as that. Don't take it personally. Actually, do take it personally because it is personal. There's nothing you can do about it either way. In came Jimmy Bain on bass, a Scottish musician with a solid rock pedigree. In came Tony Carey on keyboards, a young American who was, by most accounts, extremely talented and also extremely difficult to get along with, which, when you think about it, made him a perfect fit for Ritchie Blackmore. And holding everything together behind the kit was Cozy Powell, one of the few members of Rainbow who seemed genuinely untouchable during this period. Powell hit a drum kit like he had a personal grievance against it, and Blackmore loved that energy. So the new lineup was assembled, they started writing, and almost immediately it was clear that something different was happening. The writing process for Rainbow Rising was, by all accounts, intense and fast. Blackmore came in with ideas, riffs, structures, musical concepts, and the band built around them. Dio, meanwhile, was doing what Dio did, which was constructing these vast, mythological, lyrical landscapes that somehow managed to be completely over the top and completely sincere at the same time. That combination, Blackmore's dark, classically influenced guitar work and Dio's gift for making dragons and wizards and cosmic warriors feel emotionally real, that was the secret weapon of this whole era of Rainbow. It shouldn't work. On paper, it sounds like a parody of itself, but when you actually sit with the music, there's a genuine power to it. Dio believed every single word he sang, and that belief is contagious. They recorded the album at Musicland Studios in Munich, the same facility where the Rolling Stones recorded It's Only Rock and Roll, where Led Zeppelin would later record Presence. Martin Birch was back behind the board, continuing his run as one of the great unsung heroes of British hard rock production. Birch had a gift for capturing heaviness without sacrificing clarity, and on Rainbow Rising, he absolutely outdid himself. The sessions were tight and focused. Blackmore wasn't interested in excess or experimentation for its own sake. He knew what he wanted, the band was good enough to deliver it, and so they did. The album that emerged has only 6 tracks, 6 across roughly 40 minutes. Rainbow Rising makes its case and then gets out of its way. There's no filler, no padding, no half-hearted album track thrown in to meet runtime requirement. Every single song is pulling its full weight. It opens with Tarot Woman. This song remains one of the great album openers in rock history. Tony Carey's synthesizer intro is a swirling, slightly eerie thing that builds anticipation beautifully before Blackmore's guitar arrives and the whole thing kicks into gear. Dio's vocal performance is stunning for the first line, commanding, dramatic, but never tipping over into self-parody. Next song is Run with the Wolf. This song is leaner, more straightforward, a driving mid-tempo rocker that shows the band could do simple and powerful without needing to reach for the epic. Then Starstruck. And this is probably the most overtly commercial thing on the record, a hard, charging, riff-heavy track with a massive hook that sounds like it was designed to demolish festival crowds. And then comes Do You Close Your Eyes? This is the shortest track on the album, a relatively straightforward hard rocker that gives everyone a moment to breathe before the second half of the album. Because side two of Rainbow Rising is, without exaggeration, one of the greatest stretches of music in the history of hard rock, full stop, no qualifiers. Stargazer is the centerpiece. The song is 8.5 minutes long, recorded with the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra providing a sweeping backdrop to one of the most dramatic guitar performances Blackmore ever committed to tape. The song tells the story of slaves building a tower for a sorcerer who promises them the ability to fly. And when he finally leaps from the tower and plummets to his death, there's a moment of grim, almost biblical inevitability to it. Dio sells every second of it. Blackmore's solo is measured, melodic, and devastating. Cozy Powell's drumming is a force of nature throughout. Stargazer is the kind of song that makes you understand why people use the word transcendent about music. It genuinely reaches for something beyond the ordinary and gets there. And then, because apparently Blackmore and Dio weren't finished, the album closes with A Light in the Black. 8 minutes of relentless, escalating hard rock that features one of the most ferocious keyboard solos of the era from Tony Carey, followed by Blackmore absolutely unleashing on the guitar in a way that sounds like a man trying to prove something to the universe. The song builds and builds and then just keeps building, and by the time it finally resolves, you feel like you've been through something. Rainbow Rising was released in May 1976. The reception was strong. Critics who paid attention to the hard rock and heavy metal world recognized immediately that this was something special. It charted well in the UK and across Europe, where Rainbow had devoted and a growing fan base. In America, it was a slower burn. The US market was always complicated, especially with Rainbow. Blackmore's sound was slightly too European, too theatrical, too unconcerned with radio accessibility to break through in a way it might have with some compromises. But Blackmore didn't do compromises, and we've established this. What the album did do was cement Rainbow's reputation as a serious, heavyweight act, not a Deep Purple side project, not a vehicle for a famous guitarist between real gigs, a genuine band with a genuine identity making genuinely great music. The legacy of Rainbow Rising is interesting because it operates on two levels. On one level, it's a beloved classic among hard rock and heavy metal fans, a record that gets passed down, that people discover at 15 and carry with them for the rest of their lives. Stargazer in particular has this almost cult-like devotion around it. Ask any serious fan on genre and they'll have a story about the first time they really heard that song. On another level, it's still somewhat underappreciated in the broader cultural conversation about great rock albums. When people list the essential records of the 1970s, Rainbow Rising doesn't always make the cut in the same way that Led Zeppelin 4 or Paranoid or Highway to Hell does. And that's a genuine shame because every track from it can stand next to any of the other ones. Ritchie Blackmore made this record at the absolute peak of his powers. Ronnie James Dio made this record before the world had fully figured out how extraordinary he was. Cozy Powell made this record and sounded like a one-man army. And Martin Birch captured all of it in a way that still sounds enormous. 50 years later, the album actually just celebrated 50 years as of this recording, as it was released on May 17th, 1976. Rainbow Rising is the sound of a band operating at its ceiling. The tragedy is the lineup barely survived long enough to tour it because Blackmore, being Blackmore, was already thinking about what came next, but we'll get to that in the next video. In the meantime, check out this playlist of all the Deep Purple album reviews, and I'm including the story of Rainbow within the story of Deep Purple because I feel it's just part of a whole big story. You can check that out right here. Thanks for watching. Please like the video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.